Okay, good afternoon. Welcome back. Thank you for going out and coming back in. And I'm going to introduce Professor Francesco Saina, who's from, well, he's living and working in Rome, where he's a university professor of translation and interpreting. He's going to be talking to us about the crossovers with AI and how it's reshaping multilingual spoken communication, but a lot about the tools. And we've actually kind of met on another conference at the moment, although not face to face. And so it's really interesting to have him here and to hear what he has to offer, because it's a very cutting edge field. And please feel welcome to ask questions. Francesco, the floor is yours. And of course, you're welcome to stay on. All speakers are welcome to stay on for the rest of the session today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this kind introduction and for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be back to this conference again this year for the second year in a row. So thank you so much. My work explores how technology, and in particular digital tools and artificial intelligence, are impacting multilingual communication and language transfer processes. These innovations are enabling new interaction patterns and profoundly reshaping the industry of language services. Since such changes deeply affect communication and language models overall, they need to be addressed not only from the perspective of information technology, but also in the field of translation and interpreting studies and digital humanities, and in a broader debate and collaboration among scholars and practitioners. Then, as a translators and interpreters trainer myself, I also see how this will impact educational programs for the training of future specialized language professionals. Given the latest advancements in automatic speech recognition and spoken translation systems, in my study and research activities, special focus is devoted to some of their applications in interpreting and how that may push the boundaries of new augmented real-world use cases. So my presentation stems from my experience as a practitioner, as a translator and conference interpreter, and my collaboration with several research groups and projects on next generation language technologies. Therefore, I will try to offer an overview of the current landscape and envisage some potential paths for forthcoming scenarios. Today, computers and devices process and analyze language for several purposes by applying the models of computational linguistics and natural language processing. However, research in this field is seldom public or shared, since it often has to deal with trade secrets of the companies that hold such technology and know-how. And moreover, publications on this topic are often confined to computer science, despite language technologies entailing a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach by their very nature. In written translation, resources that we all know, such as translation memories and term bases, are already largely used and leveraged by translators, not only to improve their speed and productivity, but also to improve their consistency and accuracy. And over the years, the use of computer-assisted translation, or CAT tools, has also gradually incorporated machine translation engines, which not only aid human translators in their tasks, but are also extensively offered as a standalone solution. Conversely, in the area of spoken translation, that is interpreting, the adoption and integration of technology-based systems in the workflows and practice of interpreters has been somewhat slower and less far-reaching. The technological shift in the profession is still underway, although developments and interest in interpreting technology are considerably growing. And indeed, only recently, following a steadily growing production of multimedia content, machine interpreting, which is also referred to as automatic spoken translation or speech translation, has gained momentum both in academic and commercial environments, especially in the perspective of technically transitioning from the current cascade to more promising end-to-end models. But hesitancy or even reluctance towards technology among a segment of language professionals seems to be due to a lack of trust in the tools, considering them as a source of distraction and additional cognitive load, or scarcely effective, but also partly as a result of an approach to artificial intelligence as opposed to human intelligence or to humans outright. And beyond in my opinion, beyond the possible semantic reasons for that, because the word artificial may be associated with something unnatural, insincere, or fraudulent, the whole narration around AI should be reconsidered. Some of the most evident benefits brought to language services by this technological revolution suggest that the main advantages derive from automation. Automated intelligence and intelligent automation, or smart automation, as I will explain in a minute, are undoubtedly a winning facet, since they reduce and optimize repetitive and unproductive steps of processes. And by accomplishing such delegated tasks, AI can enhance human activity without replacing humans, but supporting and augmenting the possibilities and outreach of human performance. And in this respect, an additional facet of AI would be that of augmented intelligence. And indeed, translation and interpreting professional communities are already starting to refer to technology-supported processes as augmented translation and augmented interpreting. And I think that the next shift could be from computer-assisted to computer-augmented language services involving assistive and adaptive NLP applications. And besides the alternatives to the term artificial in artificial intelligence, the scientific community is also starting to suggest a different meaning for the second term, acknowledging that in modern digital tools, intelligence does not coincide with human-like cleverness, but rather with smartness and agency. There is the ability to successfully solve problems or complete specific tasks. Now, early on in their history, it was clear that computers were going to enable and facilitate communication among humans rather than directly interacting with them. And language has always been the distinctive feature characterizing humanity. And for decades, machines have subsequently been a medium for human interaction. However, with the recent development of neural networks and deep learning algorithms, information and communication technologies are starting to act not only as pure intermediaries, but to a certain extent also as autonomous and original language content generators. And the most popular example of that is probably OpenAI's language model, GPT-3. And presumably technology, not only language technology, will increasingly integrate with human senses, ultimately changing everyday communication paradigms and human interaction with reality. And a great read on the topic, I suggest, is the Litme Forecast report on language in the human-machine era that you can see on the slide. And despite being still distant from completely satisfactory performance, generative language models are already a reality with real-world applications in a few niche industries already. And this area is still in its infancy, but its groundbreaking role and its societal impact cannot be ignored. Now, the study and assessment of language technologies in computer science is commonly product-oriented and primarily takes into consideration parameters such as output quality, usability, or technical performance. Conversely, translation and interpreting studies generally also consider criteria including functional equivalence, faithfulness, intelligibility, and the facilitation of communicative interaction. As detailed by research, the results of early testing in interpreting show a better performance by humans in terms of intelligibility and a more accurate performance in spoken translation by machines in terms of informativeness. Considering that automated speech translation systems do not provide satisfactory outcomes by themselves yet, the current focus should therefore be on how digital tools can integrate human work by supporting and enhancing human perform activities. The labor market is also increasingly requiring the new generations of language professionals to be experts who can combine their domain expertise and knowledge with digital and IT skills. Therefore, in my opinion, most linguists are to add language programming and coding to their arsenal, since language services and language technologies will only be increasingly intertwined. And translators and interpreters will probably be no longer allowed to disregard NLP and computational linguistics, as well as language engineers will inevitably work closer to language service providers. Now, a widespread concern among human language professionals is to be eventually replaced by machines in their job. And indeed, actually, a substantial share of the lower end translation demand is already met by machine translation, with translators intervening in emerging human or expert in the loop models by fine-tuning the work of engines or addressing highly specialized niches. And the same could happen with interpreting, with speech translation, with some portions of the labor space being taken over by automated spoken translation systems, but only when communication is particularly linear, unstratified, or unambiguous. And similarly to what is already happening with written translations, humans, therefore, would be progressively covering high-end needs where more than a plain linguistic equivalence is necessary, or when content critical exchanges are at stake. And as a consequence, with greater availability of good quality automated translations, I believe that expectations towards human language professionals are going to be even higher. This will be an additional challenge for everyone, for practitioners, for associations, for training institutions, because they will be demanded a broader yet solid preparation, as well as narrowing subject matter expertise. And heading towards that direction, language professionals will be expected to offer trustworthiness rather than simple language support. And they will have to act as facilitators within a broader framework and concept of multilingual communication, and as experts providing premium interlingual consultancy. However, as previously outlined, a remarkable share of translators and even more interpreters are still not familiar with IT resources, which are already at their fingertips. And therefore, another gap in skills and mindset needs to be bridged. Text-based language technologies already significantly impacted human communication, and human-machine interaction patterns. For instance, search engine optimization has overturned how online content is conceived and put into words. And machine translation too has influenced the way texts addressed to international audiences are drafted, to such an extent that the practice of pre-editing has become common for globalization service providers. And on the other hand, fast-paced improvements are also shedding a new light on voice-based language technologies, whose consideration is progressively turning from accessibility to full productivity resources. And just like language varies depending on context, for instance, with baby talk or with foreigner talk, The same may presumably happen when communicating to computers by resorting to specific computer talk or machine talk. And since these technologies amplify diamesic variations in the use of language, speech addressed to machines will reasonably be different from spontaneous verbal expression. And that could only be consolidated over time by society becoming accustomed to interacting with machines through voice, as well as an increasingly blurred dividing line between spoken and written language that we are observing, and also a machine-induced alignment to common cognitive structures representing the linguistic knowledge of speakers of any language. And finally, text-based NLP applications such as pre-filled responses or suggested writing hint at how much human communication really largely relies upon automatic and perfunctory mechanisms, and how many communications and interactions can truly be managed with little intelligence or language understanding to a certain extent. Real-world environments are becoming increasingly AI-friendly and ever more shaped around the abilities of computational artifacts. As practice already proves to practitioners who make use of such tools, it is likely that interpreters may alter and adjust their interpreting techniques to the performance and output of these resources and their prompts. If machine talk still looks distant from widespread real-world use, I believe that computer-assisted interpreting talk could be more reasonably an emerging trend in the near future. And despite the existing limits of language technologies dampen any enthusiasm towards silver bullet AI solutions, there are numerous operating resources not even specifically designed for translators or interpreters. And I'm thinking of multilingual semantic networks, knowledge graphs, or named entity recognition and terminology extraction tools, and many more, which can turn out to be valuable assets for us. In conclusion, we should not conceive technology as an impending threat aiming at replacing humans, but rather as a resource providing support to help us excel and ingeniously achieve the best possible cooperation between human abilities and computational efficiency. And this objective can only be attained by thoroughly considering emerging communication paradigms with high quality training data and valuable language resources, and above all, by adequately educating practitioners for a critical, accountable, and transparent use of language technology. So thank you very much for your attention. And if we have a few minutes left, I'm open to taking any questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'd like to open the floor up for questions. So anybody who would like to ask Francesco about this work or about particular engines and products on the market and where they're going, feel welcome. Okay.
I have a question. Do you already see changes in the way language changes that that can be seen in the media, or something like changes, in people who are educated and know the language, that have been affected by machine use?
Yes, well, I already see that, including among language professionals, because I also work as a reviser for translation of colleagues, and I often see that there is an increasing trend of, at least in my language combinations, there are from English, French, and Spanish into Italian, which are common language combinations, where the output of machines is already quite good. And I see that language professionals already over the last few years have a tendency of translating, of adapting their output to something which is quite similar to machine translation output, or at least what I see is that, for instance, when they work with post editing, they tend to not to intervene as much as maybe they would as if their translation was made from scratch. And I think that is a real world use, a real world case. And in other applications, as I mentioned in my talk, especially for global companies or even the media, when they know that they are addressing their content to worldwide audience, I also see there an increasing trend of using sort of plain language that is deeply influenced by language generated or at least processed by machines. Yeah, I see, at least, even if that's not evident, at least some hints that this is the direction that a large portion of the use of language is heading to, in my modest opinion, of course.
Naomi?
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, thank you very much. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
I'm thinking about how computer-aided interpreting actually works, because it's real time. So it's either or. I mean, either you have a human doing the interpreting or you have a computer doing it. But you don't really have the time, like when you're doing translations, to I don't know, hear the suggestion of the CAI and then either correct it or repeat it, or I mean, how does it actually work in practice in terms of assisting the interpreter as opposed to replacing the interpreter?
Yes, thank you for your question. Well, actually, the way that computer-assisted tools work for interpreters, it's different from the way they work and help translators. I mean, when you work as a translator and you have the help of machine translation, you simply get the output, and then you can either choose to use it as a suggestion or directly edit it. With interpreting, computer assisting tools are used both before the actual event, before the actual assignment, by automatically creating glossaries or collecting resources, while during the event, they help interpreters, for example, by using speech recognition. You don't get in your ear the spoken translation as an interpreter, but you are hinted with suggestions from terminology that the machine captures through speech recognition, and therefore the machine transcribes the term and suggests a potential translation for that, or by suggesting always through automatic speech recognition potential problem triggers, for example, proper names or figures or named entities that are usually problem triggers for interpreters when there are large numbers or difficult names. Therefore, the way these machines assist interpreter is by suggesting, by visually prompting these entities and these problem triggers, and therefore enabling the interpreter to pronounce, to render those correctly. So this is the main application in which these tools can help with the interpreter. Otherwise, if the machine is used to produce and translate the whole speech, it's already replacing it. There's no way this can interact with interpreter.
So are there actually commercially available, is there commercially available software already doing all of this?
Yes, there are, at the moment, there's currently only one commercial software, which is, I think I can say the name is called Interpret Bank. It's publicly available. It can be purchased. It And it combines the two aspects that I was mentioning: terminology management and preparation, help with automatic speech recognition and suggestion. But there are more coming. There are even more that are in an experimental phase. But at the moment, Interpret Bank is the only commercial tool that can do this.
And I imagine it's not available in Hebrew yet.
Well, I think actually the resource, the way these tools work is generally language independent. It's trained on engines which are language independent. So you can work with resources in any language, because it only sees the language as information, as data, and it processes through algorithms. So the language is actually, it actually depends on the training data that the machine has.
So in other words, the user feeds in the data?
Yes, you can upload your data, your glossaries, your documents, and that way the machine will be tailored to your language resources. Otherwise, you can ask the machine to automatically generate suggestions. Of course, since this is automated, it is not still as accurate as if you feed it with your human crafted resources.
Okay, thank you.
What was particularly interesting was seeing the speech recognition coming up on screen in closed captions and helping interpreters pronounce those names, or actually seeing the figures in front of you instead of having to write them down. But you need about 5 pairs of hands, well, 3 pairs of hands. If you've got to train yourself in with this stuff, I suppose.
Yeah, it's absolutely a matter of training, and also, for instance, that's why I mentioned interpreters adapting their techniques to these tools, because, for instance, one of the main issues at the moment is latency. That is suggestion coming on the screen after 2 or 3 seconds, and of course, interpreting is something simultaneous. Therefore, you need to train and adapt your techniques to rephrase your rendition in a way that you have those 2 or 3 seconds to take advantage of those suggestions. And this is a trend that I will see increasing over the coming years.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesco. That was absolutely fabulous and fascinating. And there are other places at the moment that are showing you how to work between your translation resources and your interpreting resources and convert files so that you don't have to do the work twice. And this is also somewhere where it's going. I really want to thank you very, very much for coming to speak to us today. And I know you've had a very busy day.